What's up, guys? Welcome back to Flipping the Script Fishing. Now, recently I had a video up on Lake Pincho where we got into them on a frog, we got into them on punching. But I wanted to go further into what I do when I'm punching, the technique I use, the equipment I use, what I'm looking for, what I'm targeting, those types of things. Disclaimer, in this video I was actually using Ricky's punching up setup, which he had a really nice setup. However, it was a left-handed setup, so it left me with some weird hook sets, and we got the job done, but it was, shall we say, not very graceful. However, we got it done. So he had a good setup, one similar to mine. Unfortunately, I did not have mine with me since we were in Pennsylvania on a trip. Alright, now detecting the bite when you're pitching, when you're punching these lures, it can be very tricky. But typically, once you figure out what that bite feels like that day, it will reproduce. For some reason, all the bass seem to get in the same mood, and they'll bite similarly as the ones you've caught previously. Okay, now, there's obvious bites that when you throw in there, boom, they hit, then they start running with it. So obviously, you reel up that line, that slack, and you set that hook good and you get them in the boat. Sometimes, and you need to know how deep of the water that you're fishing. So throw in there a couple times and let it, and see how long it takes to get to the bottom. Okay, and so when you're throwing in there, and you throw in there and it does not fall that same length of time, oftentimes that's a fish. They just sucked it in and they're holding it and they're just sitting there. Okay, so you need to, before you start, trying to jiggle it around, jiggle your lure around, you need to test it to see if there's any motion or anything like that, or anything that might indicate that there's a fish that has that on there. And remember, guys, swings are free. So if you think it could be a fish, set the hook, okay? Just be mindful of that weight coming back at you, because the last thing you want is a 1.5 ounce piece of tungsten bouncing off your eyebrow, okay? Not good. It will mess you up, so be careful. Another bite is oftentimes you'll throw it in there and it will sink all the way to the bottom. You'll be jigging it up and down a little bit and you'll feel a tick, and then all of a sudden it will be, they'll just sit there with it again and it will be gummy all of a sudden. So that's a time where you might want to try setting that hook. Many times you won't feel anything and it will just start pulling. Yeah, I mean, those cases it's easy. You just reel down and you set that hook. But there's been often times where I'll punch out there and it will just keep falling and falling and falling and falling and falling. And I know it's only 5 feet deep, but 10 feet of line is just falling out of there. That's when that fish has taken it on the run. You don't feel any bite or nothing. That line just keeps feeding through that matted vegetation. In that case, you have a bunch of line out there, so you may have to set the hook twice, or heck, you maybe even 3 times. But hopefully it's only once. But I've had it many times where I've had to set the hook twice, and that's where that fast gear ratio really comes into play. You reel up all that slack you can until you feel the weight of that fish. You set the hook, and sometimes it just cuts through the hydrilla. You didn't get a hook in that fish. Reel up the slack again, set it again. So those cases can be tricky, and I've missed a lot of big fish that way because I didn't get a good hook in them. But I've also caught some fish that otherwise, if I hadn't set the hook twice, I would have missed them. So keep that in mind and be ready for that. So anytime you pitch in there and that line just keeps like it's like you're in 20 feet of water, you're only in 4 feet. Now when you're setting the hook, when you pitch these baits, punch this rig, and you're setting these baits, you really want to do your best to come straight up as best you can to really get a lot of power, because a lot of times you're not just driving the hook, but you're also cutting through a bunch of vegetation in order to penetrate and get a hook into that fish. So before that hook even makes contact with that fish, you're really cutting through a bunch of that vegetation in order to make that contact. So you reel up all the slack you can, and then you really set that hook, and you'll notice I'm pinning that rod against my chest, and I'm lifting that rod to my chest, and that way it's going straight up and you're getting that good bend in that rod. You're letting that rod do a lot of the work, and you're also forcing that fish up out of that mat so that you can sling it onto the boat and get it into the boat and into your live well. Now when I'm out there on the water, I want to focus on irregularities in that grass edge. You can go down a 100-yard stretch and it seems like it all looks the same. However, if you really pay attention, you can see those irregularities. Now these irregularities might be a simple point of that grass coming out. It might be a hole in the mat from where a fish had blown up previously. It may be a stick sticking out of that mat that you may have basically making a cavern down there for that fish to sit. I like to look for other vegetation that's growing up through the mat. So if I have a bunch of hydrilla, but then here in this one particular place I have a couple pads or gator grass or something like that coming up through it, I'll throw to that because it's an irregularity. That's something that will hold that fish.
That was terrible. That was awesome. Fantastic hook set.
In this particular video, that irregularity were these bacteria balls, and sometimes you can see these. They grow all over the country, but they look like a jellyfish, almost like a clear sack, egg sack of sorts. But what it is a bacteria ball, and they grow on sticks and other things like that. Most of the time they'll grow on something harder like a stick or a limb that's in the water. I'm assuming it was creating some kind of cavern or somewhere for this fish to sit and ambush prey as it came by. Now, so every one of these bacteria balls that I found, I was throwing and I was punching to. Now, I didn't get bit on a lot of them, but I did get bit on several of them.
You still got it?
And that was something that I kind of put together, and it actually worked out a bit. Surprising to me, it never really happened before, but in this case it worked. But it was an irregularity that I could focus on, and I could maximize my pitches.
That was a much better hook set, by the way.
I don't know.
It looked a lot better.
There you go. It's a healthy one. Nice, good, healthy fish. With that punching rig, guess what I was aiming at? Guess what I was aiming at?
Your little sack.
Yep. Exactly right.
Now, was it a bigger one or a smaller one?
The bigger one.
Okay. That other one you caught a fish off, was that a bigger one too?
I think it was a couple of them together.
So it made a bigger one.
Yeah. I wonder if they're using that and just sitting it,
Do bait fish get attracted to them or something?
Wow. Probably blocks the sun pretty good.
Don't forget about the water you're on top of. It doesn't have to punch. You don't have to have matted out vegetation. In fact, oftentimes fish will come off of clumps, submerged clumps, out from the main mat. Those are some of the irregularities that you may want to focus on. So you may have the mat, but then you have this clump that comes off of it that's under the water. Well, those basically create points that the bass can actually sit inside of and wait for something to come by, and they'll hit it. Now I'll punch those, and I'll also swim my lure by those, because sometimes the fish will come out after that lure. If you're swimming your bait by it, they'll come out after it and get it.
That's not bad. Maybe we need to put a swim jig on. Look at that. That's crazy.
Remember the sparse stuff that might be behind you in a little bit deeper water. That creates really good towers and also good ambush points. So don't get, focus on what's in front of you. However, don't forget about what's behind you. And a lot of times that's where your bigger fish will be sitting, in that little bit deeper water, in the area where they can ambush an entire school of shad as it's coming by. So don't discount those. Make sure you give those a try here.
Oh, he come off. Down on it.
I would recommend a 7.4 to 7.6 heavy action rod. Okay, now you want one, this is an Abu Garcia Vengeance. I actually like this pretty good. Vengeance does me really well. Abu Garcia, I did break one and they sent me another one. So they took care of me pretty well, so that goes a long way with me. Now you want one with a good, strong backbone, but you want one with a reasonably soft tip. Okay, not too fast, but maybe a medium fast. That way you don't pin that fish against the mat, the top of the mat, with his mouth open, and therefore ripping your hook out. But you want to be able to allow that fish to turn, but still get him through that vegetation. Now the reel that you want, I prefer a fast reel setup. This one here is an H2O Mentor. It's a 7:0 gear ratio. I'll be honest, I mean, for the price, it's not a bad reel, but I've broken a couple of them. You have to find that ratio between the speed of the reel and the strength of the reel. As you go up in gear ratio, 7:1, 8:1, 10:1, you're going to go down in your power. So you have to find that medium ground. Now, typically, I'm not doing a whole lot of reeling when I'm punching. I'm throwing out just a little ways, and so the rod's doing most of that work. I may crank it a couple times and then boat flip them. So I'm not having to worry about cranking them through a whole bunch of hydrilla or hyacinth or whatever aquatic vegetation I'm fishing. So your rod is going to do most of the power, most of the work, and your line, I would suggest nothing less than 65-pound braided line. You can even go 80-pound braided line, but nothing less than that to get through that vegetation and that thick stuff. One of the reasons I do like a fast gear ratio is because oftentimes when you drop that lure through the vegetation, the fish will take it almost on a running start. You have your lure that goes in the vegetation and the fish takes it. And suppose this is the surface of the water. Your lure goes in here, the fish takes it and starts running, and that puts a big U in your line. So the fish can actually have quite a bit of line out there, and you won't know it. So you have to set the hook, and now your line has to cut through all this vegetation in order to contact that fish. So being able to reel up that line very quickly and having a long rod to set that hook can pick up that line real well, and then you can get a hook in that fish. The weights you want to use for punching, you only want to go to the weight that you absolutely need to get through the cover you're fishing. Okay, so the lighter you can go, the better. However, sometimes it's really thick stuff and you need a larger weight. Like this in here is a ounce and a half. But tungsten weight, because tungsten is denser, so you get more weight for the smaller package. Now I know they're expensive, but typically you don't lose them because you're fishing on a 65+ pound braided line, so you don't have to worry that much about losing them. So one weight will last you a long time. If it is sparse vegetation, I'll use one of these that you can put a skirt on it, and you can tie your own skirts and put them on there. Just gives it a little bit more color, a little bit a little flair that really, I don't know, it just seems to get more bites sometimes. In this video, we're actually using 3/4 of an ounce. So 3/4 of an ounce did the job there because it wasn't as thick. Now you can get away with it. Sometimes you'll see me, I'll pitch the weight up high so that it gets some momentum and can punch through the vegetation. If you can do a more quiet entry, that's probably best. You'll probably get more bites that way. However, with some of this vegetation, it's so thick that it doesn't matter how heavy a weight I have, it's not going to go through it unless I get some momentum and it can really actually punch through it. So and that's when you need a little bit more weight, so that when it hits that mat, it's got a little bit of force behind it to punch through that matted grass or that algae in this case. I personally use a bobber stop to peg my weights. Now, if you have a lot of sliding issues, sometimes you put 2 bobber stops on there and that will keep it from sliding at all. I've been using these Sixth Sense bobber stops. They do really well. And you can also learn how to transfer a bobber stop from one line to another line just to try to save them. But they're not much. I think these are like $2 for all of them, or $1.50 or something. So I bought the variety, not the variety pack, but a bulk pack, and they've lasted me for a long time. Now, not everybody uses bobber stops. Some people like to have that weight separate from their lure. That way, when the fish sucks the lure in, they just suck in the lure and not the weight, and then they feel they get a better hook in them. However, for me, I think sometimes that weight, if you don't have it pegged, the weight will fall through the vegetation and your lure's left sitting there on the top, and it never gets to where the fish is. So there are ways to get through the mat, but I just find it so much easier. I can make a lot more presentations, quicker presentations when I have it pegged. One of the important things, in my opinion, to getting a hook in that fish with that large weight is that snell knot. Now, on my other video, my other punching video, I show you exactly how I tie the snell knot and why it's so important and all that kind of stuff. And when you have it, it's a big weight, so you're really only getting the difference between the weight and the hook point if you don't have a snell knot. But when you have a snell knot and this weight contacts the top of the hook, it will make a right angle, so therefore it increases the amount of area you have to grab a hold of that fish and then get a better hook in it. My hookup ratio went way up when I started using that snell knot. As far as hooks go, I'm a real good believer in this straight shank hook. A friend of mine turned me on to these Mustad Ultra Grip, or Ultra Point hooks. Now these things are really good. They have that keeper on there that holds the baits really well, and they're a big hook. These are 6/0 hooks. I like to go 4, 5, or 6/0 hooks, depending on the size of the lure that I'm fishing with and how much plastic I'm trying to go through. For instance, one of the flippy doodads, I would go with a 6/0 hook because it's got a little bit more plastic to get through. But if you go with a tube bait, for instance, you might want to just do a 4/0 hook. Now, the types of lures I like to use, I like a small package, something that the fish can inhale very quickly, very easily. As that bait is traveling past them, they can just suck it right in. The Lake Champlain tantrum crawl that we use in this video did very well. You can use rage crawls, packet crawls, chicker crawls, those types of things. They work very good. They're a pretty small package. The Flippy Doodad does really well as like a D-bomb, missile-based D-bomb, or beavers type lure. I will go from lures that have appendages that move, and I also do lures that don't have hardly any movement at all. I'll go vary depending on the aggressiveness of the fish, and that's something I will experiment with. So between a beaver style bait that has like zero movement to a rage crawl type bait that has a lot of movement, or a pit boss is a really good lure. The two colors I mostly do are a green pumpkin type, like a sprayed grass or a Mardi Gras, or green pumpkin blue, that kind of thing, or black and blue. So some kind of black and blue color, maybe black and red, or a red shad or something like that. And then sometimes straight black, but a black variation and a green pumpkin variation.
knew I'd get one punch. It's a giant man. Yeah. Check it out. Hold on, let me. Look at that. Hey, I got one punch and I'm happy. You're not in it as a boater, so you must not have any. You're good, you know?
Starting to get that down pretty good.
There you go. Good guy. Other guy punching, he's kind of deformed. Can't really straighten him out.
Got it.
There we go, back to punching. I saw him make a disturbance on the spout going for my bait.
Guys, there's nothing like when you use that punching rig and you throw in a clump and something thumps it, and then you set that hook and you hear that line cutting through that grass, and it's like hand-to-hand combat with the fish. It's so much fun. I highly suggest trying it, putting your head down one day and just punching it, and trust me, once you catch a couple, you'll be addicted like I am. And it can yield some very big fish. So it's one of those bites. It can be slow, can also be fast. So try it out, and might up your chances of catching that big fish. Until next time, guys, tight lines.